It was 2 a.m. when I heard my daughter-in-law say, "Tomro will send her to a nursing home. It's all set." My whole body went cold. I grabbed my purse and slipped out the back door. The next morning, they were running around the house, panicking. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe to her voice and tell me in the comments which part shocked you the most. The shadows of the living room seemed to stretch and twist, and for a moment I felt invisible, insignificant, like a ghost in my own home. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just moved. Slowly, silently, I grabbed my purse from the hall table and slipped out the back door, careful not to let a single floorboard creak. I pressed myself against the cold siding of the house, my breath shallow, my mind racing. How could they plan this? My own son. My daughter-in-law, I had spent decades loving them, raising him, nurturing a family that now seemed to want me erased. Every memory of birthdays, quiet Sunday mornings, even the little notes I left in Ethan's lunch bag, they were all meaningless to them now. I walked down the side path, each step deliberate, each moment a strange mix of fear and clarity. I wasn't going to let them see me panic. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Somewhere deep inside, a slow, steady strength took root, as if my entire life had been leading me to this moment of quiet defiance. The next morning, I watched from a safe distance. My heart tightened as I saw them running around the house, panicking. Chairs were overturned. The kitchen table was a disaster. Ethan's face was pale, tense, shouting something about where did she go. Lena's eyes darted in every direction, her usual calm facade crumbling. My absence had thrown their carefully constructed little world into chaos, and a strange, subtle satisfaction warmed me. Not out of cruelty, but because I had found my own voice again. And as I stood there, hidden in the shadows, I realized something important. They had underestimated me. They had assumed I was fragile, dependent, dispensable. But in that quiet early morning, as I watched them scramble, I understood that I was neither of those things. I had always been more than they allowed themselves to see. I didn't run away out of fear. I ran to claim my dignity, my agency, the control they thought they could steal. And in that small, trembling step away from the back door, I began a journey they couldn't imagine, one that would quietly, irrevocably change everything. But I wasn't ready to confront them yet. Not today. Today, I would just watch. I would gather my strength. And I would wait, because sometimes the most powerful actions are the ones no one sees coming. The morning sun had barely crested the rooftops when the chaos inside the house began to unfold. From my hiding spot behind the tall hedges along the driveway, I watched them stumble through the rooms like people who had lost their bearings. Ethan's voice was sharp, frantic, calling my name over and over. "Mom!" "Where are you?" "Lena, tell me where she went." Lena was pacing the kitchen, her hands twisting at her sides, the carefully composed mask of the previous night shattered. She muttered under her breath, half coherent, like a storm about to break. She can't leave. We need a plan. Call her. Find her." Her desperation was almost comical if it weren't so bitter. I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and quiet vindication. This, I thought, was the reality of underestimating someone. From my vantage point, I could see Maggie, our housekeeper, lingering nervously in the hallway. Her eyes flickered toward the chaos, worry etched into every line of her face. I'd trusted her for years, and though she never spoke openly against Lena or Ethan, I knew she understood the tension. Her silence, as always, was her way of keeping the peace, but I could see the judgment in her eyes, the loyalty quietly siding with me. Ethan's frustration grew louder. "Mom, this isn't funny. Where are you? Answer me." His tone was edged with irritation now, and I realized something. He wasn't angry at Lena. Not really. He was angry that he couldn't control me. And for the first time in years, I felt a small, steady surge of power. They had spent so long trying to dictate my life, to clip my wings, and now, without a single word from me, they were scrambling helplessly. Lena tried calling, her phone cradled against her ear like a lifeline. "Please, answer. Just talk to me." Her voice cracked. Panic made her sound younger, almost vulnerable. And yet, I knew her well enough to recognize the strategy beneath the fear. She wanted to guilt me, to draw me back into their orbit so she could finish what she had planned. But I didn't move. I didn't answer. I simply watched. Through the front window, I could see David, an old family friend, stepping onto the porch from across the street. He stopped, taking in the disarray, shaking his head quietly. A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips, knowing more than he let on. Even from here, I felt a sense of support, a subtle reminder that I wasn't completely alone. As the minutes stretched into an hour, the frantic energy inside the house began to turn in on itself. Objects were overturned, chairs were half pushed across the rooms, papers scattered. Lena's attempts at authority dissolved with each unanswered call, and Ethan's voice cracked, frustration mixing with guilt. I stayed in the shadows, my pulse slowing, feeling the weight of the past few decades pressing into me. And in that quiet moment, I realized something crucial. They had underestimated me, yes, but they had also revealed themselves. Every glance, every muttered word, every desperate phone call exposed the cracks in the facade they so carefully maintained. The house no longer belonged to them, not in spirit. I had left, yes, but more importantly, I had awakened. And slowly, imperceptibly, I began to think about what I would do next. I spent the morning perched on the edge of the garden, hidden behind the lilac bushes, watching the house I had called home for decades turn upside down. Every raised voice felt like a revelation. Ethan's frustration was now mixed with guilt. I could see it in the way he kept glancing at the empty hallway, realizing, perhaps too late, that I wasn't some fragile woman to be pushed around. Lena, on the other hand, moved through the rooms with the forced calm of someone teetering on the edge of a tantrum. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to straighten up chairs and stack papers, as though the physical act could restore the order she had lost. It struck me quietly how much they had depended on me, not just for care, for presence, but for stability. My absence, silent and deliberate, revealed the truth they had spent years avoiding. The house ran on more than just walls and furniture. It ran on me. On my quiet decisions, my routines, my patience. And now that I was gone, chaos reigned. I thought back to the subtle ways they had pushed me aside over the years. Birthday parties dismissed, small favors ignored, my advice minimized. Every small indignity, once buried under love and familial duty, now unfolded in my memory like pages of a book I had long since stopped reading aloud. I realized with a slow, creeping clarity that those quiet injuries had built a foundation for the woman I had become, the woman who could step back, observe, and plan. Nancy, my old neighbor and friend, appeared at the end of the street. She waved softly, and I nodded, grateful for her presence. She never intruded, never offered judgment. She simply understood. Sometimes she would whisper suggestions over the phone, subtle nudges about what I might consider doing without ever telling me what to do. It was rare to find someone who didn't try to fix you, who simply helped you see your own strength, and that quiet support grounded me as I watched Ethan and Lena stumble through the morning. Maggie, the housekeeper, peeked around the kitchen door, her expression unreadable. I knew she had seen the tension for years, seen Lena's manipulations and Ethan's quiet compliance. Her glance toward me when she thought I wasn't looking carried the weight of someone silently acknowledging, "I know what's happening." Even in my absence, there were allies, small, unseen, waiting for the moment when quiet dignity would reclaim its place. Every sound from the house shouts, crashing furniture, the shrill ring of a forgotten phone felt like confirmation that my instincts had been correct. I didn't belong in fear. I didn't belong as a shadow, a nuisance, or an obstacle, to be removed. I belonged in control of my own life, my own story, and as I sat there, hiding in plain sight, I allowed myself the first small, secret smile in weeks. Because in watching them unravel, in seeing the facade crack, I understood that I held something they could never take from me: my voice, my mind, and my ability to act with calm, deliberate purpose. And for the first time since that fateful night, I allowed myself to imagine how I would reclaim what was mine, not with anger, but with quiet, undeniable clarity. By late morning, I knew I couldn't just remain a shadow, watching the chaos unfold. I needed someone who understood someone outside the house, someone I could trust. That's when Nancy stepped up, just as she always had. She appeared at the end of my driveway, carrying a small thermos of coffee, and waved with that calm, knowing smile of hers. I felt a rush of relief. Sometimes, all a person needs is a witness, someone who sees the truth without judgment. "I brought you coffee," she said softly, her voice carrying over the distance. "You okay, really?" I nodded, taking the thermos from her. The warmth seeped into my hands, anchoring me. "I will be," I said, though the words felt more like a promise to myself than anything else. We settled into the shade of the old oak tree at the edge of my small, borrowed space in the neighborhood, not too close to the house, not too far to lose sight of them. Nancy didn't ask the obvious questions. She never did. She simply listened, letting me recount what I'd overheard, my voice steady but tinged with the ache of betrayal. They can't really think this will work," I said, almost to myself, "sending me away like I am disposable. My own son, and Lena always so polite on the outside, plotting behind my back. How could they?" Nancy gave a soft sigh. "People like that, they underestimate the quiet ones. They think control is power, but it's only an illusion. You know that." Her words settled over me, a quiet affirmation. And as I sipped the coffee, I began to think not just about survival, but about strategy. I didn't need to yell, to confront, to create scenes. They were fragile, and panic had already shown me how easily the facade could crumble. Quietly, deliberately, I could begin to reclaim what was mine, my home, my dignity, my agency. We watched together as Ethan and Lena flitted through the rooms, frantic. Phones rang unanswered. Papers were knocked to the floor. Chairs were overturned. I could see Lena's face, the forced calm breaking into sharp lines of panic, as Ethan barked directions she didn't want to hear. And in that moment, I understood something powerful. I was already ahead. My absence had shifted the balance. Nancy leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You need a plan, yes, but one that keeps you safe. Quiet steps, small moves. They can't fight what they don't see coming." I nodded again, feeling the first flickers of determination that weren't rooted in fear. I began thinking of small ways to assert myself without confrontation. Legal avenues, subtle manipulations, unseen allies like Maggie and David. I began mapping the morning, noting every weakness, every crack in their confidence, and as the hours passed, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Clarity, strength. They had underestimated me. Yes, but the morning had proven one thing: I was not fragile. I was not a pawn. I was a force they could not see, and soon they would feel it. Not with shouts or rage, but with quiet, undeniable precision. By the time Nancy left, I had already begun to plan the first steps. Nothing reckless, nothing obvious. Just deliberate, careful moves that would restore what had been stolen from me. My place in the house, my respect, and my life. And deep down I knew they would never see it coming. I didn't rush. That was the first rule I reminded myself of as I moved quietly through the morning, tracing the edges of my life that Lena and Ethan had tried to control. The coffee from Nancy still warmed my hands as I considered my next move. I wasn't leaving because I was scared. I was leaving on my own terms, carefully, deliberately, with a plan that they could never anticipate. The first step was simple: reclaiming my independence in a way that mattered. I met Tom Riley, our family lawyer, later that morning. I had trusted him for years, quietly handling small matters in the background, never drawing attention. "Tom," I said, sitting across from him in his office, "I need to make sure nothing can be taken from me. Nothing at all. I need to secure my place, my rights, before it's too late." He studied me for a moment, his brow furrowed, and then nodded slowly. "I thought you might come today. Don't worry, we'll make sure everything's protected. You're taking the right steps, Margaret." His voice was calm, steady, a grounding presence in the storm I was quietly walking into. I left his office feeling more certain than I had in weeks. The pieces were aligning. The first moves, in a quiet, deliberate plan, forming in my mind. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need shouting. I needed strategy, patience, and presence of mind. And I had all three. Back at the house, I watched from a distance again. Lena had begun making calls frantic, half pleading, half commanding, as if her words could summon me back. Ethan hovered nearby, conflicted, unsure. Their panic was palpable, a tangible energy that I could almost touch, and I realized how deeply they had relied on me, not just for care but for the rhythm of their lives. My absence revealed the truth they had tried so hard to hide. They were fragile without me. That evening, I moved quietly to secure my small apartment. It was modest, yes, but it was mine. Every drawer, every shelf, every corner of that space whispered a sense of control and peace I hadn't felt in years. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, savoring the sensation of being in charge of my own world. Lena and Ethan couldn't reach me here. They couldn't dictate my life. And that knowledge, small as it seemed, filled me with an unexpected warmth. I called Maggie later, just enough to gauge her awareness without revealing my full plan. "Keep an eye," I said lightly, "nothing more." She understood. Her quiet support was another layer of reassurance, another thread in the web I was weaving, carefully, deliberately. As I sat by the window, watching the evening light fall over the city, I allowed myself the first moment of satisfaction. Not revenge, not yet, but the knowledge that I was no longer powerless. My steps were measured, quiet, and precise. And every move I made now, however small, carried weight. Tomorrow, I thought, would be another day. Another opportunity to quietly reclaim what had been threatened, to demonstrate strength without raising my voice. Lena might think she had control. Ethan might think they could manipulate me, but I had learned something powerful in the past 24 hours. The quiet ones, the ones underestimated, are the ones who shape the outcome when no one is looking. And I would prove it. The next morning, I heard my phone buzzing softly in the apartment. I glanced at it, Ethan's name flashing on the screen. Insistent, urgent. My first instinct was to ignore it, and I did. I wanted him to feel the weight of my absence, to understand that I wasn't a presence to be commanded or controlled. I let it ring, and then ring again. Minutes later, a series of texts came through. "Mom, this isn't funny. Please, just answer. Where are you? Lena's worried I'm worried. We can't, please." Each word revealed a desperation that neither shouting nor pleading could hide. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. Their own panic was more revealing than anything I could say. From the window, I could see Lena pacing the driveway, her hands twisting in frustration, her phone clutched tightly to her ear as if holding it could somehow summon me back. I imagined her muttering to Ethan off-screen, trying to coordinate a plan to regain control, and I allowed myself a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. The first cracks were forming in the facade she'd spent so long perfecting. I thought back to the countless mornings she had waltzed into the kitchen, all sweetness and politeness, leaving sharp little comments disguised as concern. I remembered Ethan, eager to appease her too often, letting her influence dictate our lives. But now, silence became my ally. Every unanswered call, every ignored text was a subtle reminder. I was not theirs to command. Later, Maggie stopped by the apartment, ostensibly to return a forgotten set of keys. Her eyes flicked toward me, a mixture of sympathy and quiet understanding. "She's losing it," Maggie murmured softly, shaking her head. "And he's lost too." I nodded. That was all the confirmation I needed. Their panic wasn't just about me being gone, it was about the illusion of control slipping through their fingers. I spent the afternoon walking quietly along the streets near my new apartment, observing the world moving at its ordinary pace, while the storm of my absence raged back at the house. Families walked by, dogs barked, kids rode bicycles along the sidewalks, and I felt the strange freedom of being untethered from their manipulation. It was a small, almost invisible victory, but a victory nonetheless. By evening, Ethan had left multiple voicemails, his tone wavering between frustration and genuine worry. Lena tried calling again, this time more insistently, her voice sharper, less controlled. But I remained calm, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, feeling the rhythm of my own heartbeat instead of theirs. And with each passing moment, I felt the quiet power of knowing they couldn't force me back. In that stillness, I began to see the next step forming. The first moves had been made, but there were layers yet to unfold. I didn't need confrontation or rage. My revenge, if it could even be called that, would be subtle, patient, and undeniably effective. They had underestimated me, and I would let the unraveling continue, quietly, deliberately, until they understood that control had never been theirs to take. That evening, I found myself sitting by the window of my small apartment, letting the city lights wash over me while my mind replayed memories I had tucked away for years. Small moments, once insignificant, now shone with clarity. Lena's sly little remarks at family gatherings, Ethan's polite nods instead of real confrontation, even my own hesitations to speak up. All of it now formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. They had built their little world on my compliance, and now that compliance was gone. I remembered a particular afternoon, years ago, when I had stayed home sick and Ethan had scolded me gently for overreacting about some minor household matter. Lena had smiled that thin, polite smile that masked impatience, watching me shuffle around the living room. Back then, I had swallowed my hurt, reminding myself that love required patience. That love should never have meant erasing yourself. And now, sitting quietly in my own space, I realized how many years I had given without truly asserting my voice. The phone rang again, this time Nancy. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. I exhaled slowly. "Better," I admitted. "They're unraveling. And I'm seeing things clearly now. I can't go back to being invisible." Nancy's laugh was quiet, reassuring. "You never were invisible, Margaret. You just let them think they could manage you. But now they're seeing the truth, and it's going to shake them." I smiled, thinking of Maggie too, and David, our old family friend. Both were quiet observers, allies in the shadows. Small, seemingly insignificant moments of support that no one could notice. But in that web of quiet solidarity, I felt the first hints of control returning, not over them, but over my own life, my own story. As the night stretched on, I thought more about my steps forward. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted clarity, dignity, and a subtle shift that they couldn't resist acknowledging. Their panic had already shown me their weaknesses, the reliance on my presence, the fragility beneath their polished facades. Every forgotten note, every overlooked task in the house had been evidence of what they depended on me for, and now it was my turn to orchestrate the next moves quietly, deliberately. I closed my eyes and imagined the mornings ahead. Ethan pacing, Lena muttering to herself, Maggie and David quietly observing the small tremors of chaos growing without overt confrontation. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. This was not revenge in the traditional sense. It was reclamation. It was quiet, poetic justice, and it would be effective because it was unseen, deliberate, and impossible to argue against. Before I went to sleep, I placed my hand over the small stack of legal documents I had begun organizing earlier. Steps to secure my home, my rights, my voice. Everything they had tried to take, everything they thought they could erase soon, it would all be protected. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with quiet, undeniable power. And as I drifted into sleep, the last thought that lingered was simple yet profound. They had underestimated me. Yes, but they would soon realize that the quiet ones, the ones they dismissed, the ones they thought would comply, are often the ones who change everything when no one is looking. The following morning, I returned to the outskirts of my old home, careful to remain unseen but close enough to observe. I wanted to see how the panic had settled, or rather, how it hadn't. Ethan was standing in the driveway, his hands on his hips, muttering to himself. Lena hovered near the front door, phone pressed tightly to her ear, each word clipped, sharp with frustration. They were trying to reassert control, to show me I was still within their reach. But I stayed quiet, calm, observing the cracks widen with each passing moment. I noticed the small details that revealed more than words ever could. A coffee cup left on the counter from last night, an open envelope spilling papers onto the floor, a chair still half tilted in the living room. The house, once so meticulously ordered, now betrayed their panic in every minor imperfection. And I realized with quiet satisfaction, their illusion of control was crumbling faster than I could have hoped. Later, Maggie appeared at the gate, casually checking the mailbox as if it were routine. She caught my eye and offered the smallest of nods, almost imperceptible, but enough. I nodded back, and in that silent exchange, I felt the reassurance of loyalty and understanding. I wasn't alone. Even in the shadows, allies were present, quietly reinforcing what I could now see clearly. The first steps toward reclaiming my life had already begun. By mid-afternoon, I had taken careful notes on every interaction I observed. Ethan's tone when he thought no one was listening, Lena's subtle attempts to manipulate him, their reliance on Maggie for reassurance, each small observation became a piece of the puzzle I was quietly assembling. I wasn't making rash moves, not yet. This was preparation, a slow, deliberate strategy that would ensure the eventual reclaiming of my home, my voice, and my dignity. Nancy called again, her voice warm and steady. "How are they taking it?" she asked. "They're floundering," I said softly. "Every attempt they make to control me only shows me their weaknesses. I can see every crack, every misstep, and I'm learning to use it without them even realizing it." Nancy's soft laugh was reassuring. "Exactly. Keep observing. Keep patient. Let them unravel themselves." That night, I returned to my apartment, feeling a calm satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. The quiet of my space, the deliberate steps I had taken, the subtle ways I was beginning to reclaim power, it all felt right. This wasn't about yelling or confrontation. It wasn't about anger. It was about dignity, about showing them, without words, that I could never be controlled. As I prepared a simple dinner, the city lights spilling into my kitchen, I realized something profound. The power I had feared was gone, had always been within me. I had simply allowed it to be overlooked, And now, with patience, observation, and quiet action, I was reclaiming it piece by piece. Lena and Ethan would feel it soon, whether they knew it or not, and when they did, it would be unmistakable, not because I raised my voice, but because I finally refused to be silenced. By the next morning, I felt ready to take the first small, deliberate steps. I wasn't rushing. I was precise. I began with subtle changes they wouldn't notice at first, small reminders of my independence and presence. A letter slipped under the door, addressed to me but clearly seen by anyone entering, notifying them that I had consulted with Tom Riley. Legal matters had been secured. My home, my rights, my decisions, no longer theirs to manipulate. I watched from a distance as Ethan picked up the note, confusion immediately crossing his face. Lena hovered behind him, arms crossed, reading over his shoulder. Their whispers carried across the yard, though the words were muffled, and yet I could feel the tension tighten around them. "Why didn't she tell us?" Lena muttered, her voice sharp, revealing both fear and irritation. Ethan fumbled for words, unable to explain, unable to control. Their frustration and panic were tangible, almost delicious in its subtlety. Maggie arrived later, her presence calm but deliberate, delivering small details about what had been left unfinished around the house. She didn't speak openly about me, but I could feel her quiet support. Every glance, every small acknowledgement told me she was on my side. Even David, from his corner across the street, gave a knowing wave when he saw me quietly observing. Small pieces of my quiet network were aligning perfectly. I began walking past the house during the day, always keeping my distance, just enough to be seen without being confrontational. Every time they noticed me, Ethan's expression wavered between guilt and irritation. Lena's patience cracked a little more. I left traces, little signs that I was reclaiming my life and presence without entering their chaos directly. By evening, the first confrontational message from Lena arrived. "Margaret, this isn't funny. Come back now." I didn't reply. I let the words linger, just as I had done with their phone calls and texts before. The silence was more powerful than any shouting could have been. It was a subtle mirror reflecting their panic, their dependence, their inability to manage without me. That night, I sat in my apartment sipping tea, watching the glow of the city outside, thinking about the patterns I had observed over the years. Every move, every choice, every quiet decision I had made for my family, all of it had built the foundation of this moment. Now I had the clarity and freedom to finally act on it, in ways they could never anticipate. I wasn't seeking revenge in the conventional sense. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no storm. My actions were calm, deliberate, and unavoidable. Slowly, without their noticing at first, I was reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my home, and with each passing day, the quiet tension I created would grow until they could no longer deny the power I had always possessed. As I turned off the lights and settled in for the night, I allowed myself a soft, satisfied smile. They had underestimated me. But they would not underestimate me again, and they would feel it not through anger, but through the quiet certainty that I was no longer a presence to be controlled. I was the one in control now. The next morning I decided it was time for a slightly bolder step. Not aggressive, not loud, just undeniable. I sent a certified letter to Ethan, laying out my legal rights regarding the house. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply stated facts clearly and calmly. And then I waited. I watched from the small cafe down the street as Ethan's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief when the mail arrived. Lena hovered by his side, her face a mask of controlled panic. I could see the tension ripple between them, his frustration at being blindsided, her frustration at losing control. Every small gesture, the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the envelope, the way she chewed at her lip reeled, the cracks I had been patiently waiting for. Nancy called me later, laughing softly. "They don't know what to do with themselves, do they?" she asked. I smiled quietly. No, I admitted. Every move I've made has them second-guessing. And that's exactly what they need to feel. Back at my apartment, I began organizing the next phase of my plan. Simple, quiet moves that wouldn't alarm anyone immediately, but would slowly reclaim what had been taken. I contacted a local handyman, someone I knew to be discreet, and asked him to make small, necessary repairs around the house. Nothing major, nothing visible from the street. But when the time came, the house would be in perfect order, and no one could claim that I hadn't cared for it. Meanwhile, I kept observing. I walked past the house in the evenings, letting them see me, letting them realize that I was calm, confident, untouchable. Lena's frustration became more pronounced each day. Ethan, ever the mediator, tried to calm her, but clearly didn't know how. I realized that my absence had revealed more than just their reliance on me. It had revealed their fragility. That evening, Maggie stopped by my apartment again, casually mentioning things left undone in the kitchen or living room. "She's panicking," Maggie said softly. "And he's trying to fix everything, but they can't. Not without you." I nodded, grateful for her subtle confirmation. Every small detail, every quiet observation, added weight to my plan. I made sure to keep my own life in order. Meals were simple but nourishing, my apartment warm and inviting. I took walks through the nearby streets, sometimes passing the house, sometimes not, always maintaining the air of someone unshakable. And slowly, I began to see it, the small victories stacking quietly. Their control slipping further, my independence strengthening. As I settled in that night, I realized the truth I had been holding close. Revenge wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about loud displays of power. It was quiet. It was deliberate. It was the slow, inevitable realization that I could reclaim my life without them even noticing, until it was too late for them to do anything about it. And in that quiet reflection, I felt a calm certainty I hadn't known in years. I was finally seeing the beginnings of balance restored. The house, my life, my dignity, they would all belong to me again. And nothing they could do would stop it. By mid-morning, I realized the ripple effect of my small, deliberate actions was starting to take shape. I had arranged for a few of my neighbors to mention casually that the house had been quiet, that I had been seen around town, and that everything seemed perfectly normal with me. Subtle, almost invisible moves, but they carried weight. Lena noticed first. I could see her pacing the living room through the window, phone clutched tightly, muttering under her breath. Ethan hovered nearby, trying to calm her, but I saw the strain in his shoulders, the way he kept glancing toward the driveway, unsure of what to do next. Later, I walked past the house on the sidewalk, my shopping bag swinging casually at my side. Lena caught sight of me instantly. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she quickly masked it. Ethan's reaction was slower, a tense mix of guilt and disbelief. I didn't wave. I didn't acknowledge them. I simply walked by, calm, composed, untouchable in my quiet presence. That moment, small as it seemed, was a quiet assertion. I was here, I was unafraid, and nothing they could do would force me back into submission. Maggie appeared that evening, dropping off a small package I had requested, documents confirming my legal claim over certain parts of the house and property. She whispered as she handed it to me, "They're on edge. You've done exactly what needed to be done." I smiled faintly. Yes, I had. Every small action, every letter, every observation had been a piece of a larger design, and the tension I could now see in Ethan and Lena was proof it was working. That night, I sat by the window in my apartment, sipping tea and watching the house from a distance. The lights flickered on and off, shadows moving, voices carrying faintly through the evening air. I listened carefully, noting every raised tone, every hurried movement. Lena was trying to coordinate, Ethan was trying to reason, and neither of them realized how powerless they had become. My absence, my quiet strategy, had forced them into a corner of their own making. As I reflected, I felt a deep sense of calm, the first real clarity in weeks. They had underestimated me. Yes, but their mistakes had been building toward this inevitable moment. I didn't need to confront them with anger or words. I simply needed patience, observation, and a subtle assertion of my presence. Every trembling hand, every anxious glance from Lena, every hesitation from Ethan, it all told me the truth. The quiet ones, the ones they assumed would comply, are often the ones who reclaim everything when no one is looking. Before sleep, I arranged a few more small touches, a quietly scheduled inspection, a discreet legal notice left in the mailbox, a few subtle messages of observation, all invisible, all deliberate, all quietly reshaping the balance. Tomorrow, I thought, they would feel the effects even more. And when they did, it wouldn't be through shouting or confrontation. It would be through the undeniable presence of someone they had underestimated all along. And in that thought, I felt an unshakable calm. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And I was finally beginning to see the path to complete clarity, dignity, and quiet triumph. By the next morning, the house was alive with a quiet, tense energy that hadn't existed before. I could see it even from across the street. Lena was moving faster than usual, flitting from room to room, as though trying to erase invisible traces of my presence. Ethan was following behind her, his attempts at calm mediation faltering with every passing minute. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I could feel it. The shift in their rhythm, the way they were reacting instead of acting, told me everything I needed to know. My absence had begun to rewrite the rules. I spent the morning making quiet preparations of my own. Letters, small legal updates, and carefully timed visits from Maggie and David, all orchestrated so that nothing appeared forced, nothing appeared dramatic. Every move was deliberate, gentle, almost invisible, and yet the results were already beginning to show. That afternoon, I noticed Ethan pausing at the front door, phone in hand, clearly reading something he hadn't expected. Lena's voice carried softly from the kitchen, sharp and frustrated, though filtered through the walls. Why didn't she tell us? How did we miss this? I smiled quietly to myself. Their panic, their confusion, was growing, and yet I remained patient. This wasn't about forcing a confrontation. It was about letting the truth quietly settle into their awareness. Later, I walked past the house in the soft light of late afternoon, carrying a small basket of flowers. They saw me again. Lena froze mid-step. Ethan's hand hovered over the door handle as if debating whether to come outside. I didn't pause. I didn't wave. I simply walked by calm and unshaken. The subtle power in that quiet gesture, the reminder that I was here on my terms, was enough to unsettle them further. Maggie stopped by my apartment that evening, leaving a note tucked discreetly under the door. They're noticing you. Every move you make counts. Stay patient. I read it slowly, savoring the reassurance. Every ally in my quiet plan mattered. Every small action reinforced the growing imbalance I had been cultivating. I reflected on the patterns I had observed for years, the small ways Lena had tried to manipulate, the moments Ethan had prioritized her over me, the little daily indignities I had silently tolerated, and now, with patience, observation, and quiet strategy, the tables were shifting. They were beginning to see that control could not be wrested from someone who had never truly lost it. That night, as I sat with a cup of tea by the window, I allowed myself a small sense of pride. The tension in the house, the small cracks forming in Lena's composure, the hesitant movements of Ethan, it all pointed to the same truth. My quiet, deliberate strategy was working. And yet the ultimate moment, the complete reclamation of my home and my dignity, was still ahead. Patience, I reminded myself, had always been my greatest ally. Tomorrow would bring more observation, more careful steps, more subtle assertions of presence. And when the culmination finally arrived, it wouldn't be loud. It would be undeniable. The morning light filtered softly into my apartment, and I felt a quiet thrill as I sipped my coffee. Today, I decided I would make my presence impossible to ignore, but still without confrontation. Subtlety had been my greatest ally, and now it would become the tool of undeniable clarity. I began with small gestures that seemed innocuous at first. A few of my personal items, long forgotten in the house, were quietly returned to their rightful places, books on the shelf, a favorite blanket neatly folded, a framed photograph repositioned where it could be seen. Each small act carried meaning. They couldn't ignore it, they wouldn't understand it immediately, but the message was unmistakable. I was here, fully aware, fully present, and entirely unshakable. By mid-morning I saw Ethan pacing the living room, phone in hand, repeatedly trying to call me. Lena hovered behind him, her face pale, a tremor in her voice whenever she spoke. "I don't understand." "How did she—" Her words trailed off, caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply, unable to assert control. The quiet tension was almost tangible, and I felt it radiating across the street, even as I walked past on a casual errand. Maggie had stopped by earlier, leaving a note that read, "They're starting to realize. Every step you take counts. Keep steady." I folded it carefully, tucking it into my purse. Her calm reassurance was like a quiet anchor. I knew I wasn't alone, even in this invisible battlefield of subtle power and patient observation. Later, I walked through the local park, allowing myself a moment of reflection. Every subtle move I had made, every letter, every small gesture had been deliberate, and now the culmination was near. Lena's panic was growing, Ethan's attempts to maintain order faltering. They were beginning to understand that the quiet presence they had dismissed for years was neither fragile nor dependent. That evening, I returned home, quietly preparing for the next steps. I placed my hand on the stack of legal documents, imagining the realization that would wash over them when the truth fully landed. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to confront. All I needed was to let patience, observation, and subtlety do their work. And when it did, they would see clearly, without argument, that control had never been theirs to take. As night fell, I allowed myself a soft, satisfied smile. The tension, the subtle panic, the anxious whispers, it all pointed to the same truth. I had reclaimed my presence. I had reclaimed my voice. And soon, very soon, I would reclaim the home, the space, and the respect that had always been mine, without raising my voice, without forcing their recognition. The power of patience and quiet observation had done what years of silent endurance could not. And as I closed my eyes that night, I felt the calm certainty of the final phase approaching. The unraveling, the recognition, the quiet triumph, it was all near. Tomorrow they would truly see what they had underestimated for far too long. The morning was calm, almost deceptively so. I arrived at the house quietly, carrying a small stack of neatly organized papers, nothing dramatic. Nothing loud, just clarity, precision, and truth. Ethan and Lena were already moving about, their panic visible in every twitch and hesitation. I walked up the driveway, taking deliberate, unhurried steps. Lena's eyes widened as she realized I was there. Ethan froze mid-step, phone still in hand, as if unsure whether to call or speak. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. The moment was already mine. "Good morning," I said softly, almost casually. I thought it was time to come by. Lena stammered, her composure slipping. "Margaret, we didn't." I know exactly what you didn't expect, I interrupted gently, laying the papers on the table. Everything you hoped to control, everything you thought was beyond me, it's not. Ethan leaned forward, scanning the documents. His eyes widened as he realized the legal clarity, the protections, the undeniable proof that I had quietly claimed my rights all along. Lena's panic turned to disbelief, then frustration, but there was nothing either of them could do. No argument, no confrontation, just quiet, undeniable truth. I watched them, not with anger, not with malice, but with the calm satisfaction of someone who had patiently reclaimed her life. Every subtle step, every quiet observation, every small intervention had led to this moment. They had underestimated me for years, and now the realization hit them all at once. I smiled softly. I never needed to fight loudly. You've always seen me as quiet, compliant, invisible. But quiet doesn't mean powerless, and it certainly doesn't mean broken. Lena's shoulders slumped, Ethan exhaled sharply, and for the first time in years, I felt a deep, serene relief. The house was mine, not because of confrontation, not because of anger, but because I had quietly, patiently reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my presence. Later that evening, I sat by my window in my own home, watching the city lights shimmer across the streets. There was a calm in the air, a sense of resolution that had been absent for far too long. My voice had been heard, my life had been respected, and my quiet, deliberate actions had reshaped the balance without chaos, without aggression. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lift gently off my shoulders. I had done what I needed to do, not for revenge, but for clarity, dignity, and peace. And in that quiet reflection, I realized the truth. Sometimes the strongest power is the one that whispers, not shouts. The most enduring triumph comes not from force, but from patience, wisdom, and an unshakable sense of self. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Maybe your voice will be next on Her Voice.